Have you ever stopped to wonder why you do certain things the way you do? Most people move through life assuming their habits and reactions are just part of their personality, something they were born with or simply developed over time. You apologize constantly, struggle to ask for help, or always put everyone else first, and it just feels normal. It feels like you. But here is something worth considering. Some of the behaviors you have carried for years, the ones that feel so deeply woven into who you are, may not have started as personality traits at all. They may have started as survival strategies. Research in developmental psychology consistently shows that the environment we grow up in shapes how we think, feel, and behave well into adulthood. And one of the most quietly damaging environments a child can grow up in is one defined by neglect. In this video, we are going to explore everyday habits that are often rooted in childhood neglect. Habits so common that most people never connect them to their past at all. Before we dive into these habits, it is important to understand what childhood neglect actually means, because many people hear that word and immediately think of extreme abuse or dramatic visible trauma. But neglect is often far more quiet than that. It does not always leave physical marks or obvious scars. Neglect can be emotional, physical, or psychological, and it frequently shows up in the most subtle, everyday ways. It might look like a parent who was physically present but emotionally completely unavailable. It might be a caregiver who consistently dismissed a child's feelings, told them to toughen up, or simply never asked how they were doing on a deeper level. It could mean a child's emotional needs were never consistently met, not because their parents were monsters, but sometimes because those parents were dealing with their own unresolved pain, stress, or emotional limitations. When a child's core needs for connection, validation, and emotional safety go unmet repeatedly over time, it shapes the way that child sees themselves and the world around them in profound and lasting ways. The first habit is one you might not even notice yourself doing anymore because it has become so automatic. It is over-apologizing for everything, and we mean everything. Bumping into a chair, taking up space in a conversation, asking a simple question, even just existing in a room can trigger an immediate sorry from someone who grew up in a neglectful environment. Here is why this happens. When a child consistently receives the message, whether spoken or unspoken, that their presence is an inconvenience, they begin to internalize that belief deeply. If your needs were met with sighs, eye rolls, silence, or irritation, you quickly learned that the safest thing to do was to shrink yourself. Apologizing became a shield, a way to get ahead of potential rejection or conflict before it could happen. So you started saying sorry preemptively, not because you did anything wrong, but because some part of you still believes that simply needing things or taking up space requires an apology from you. Closely connected to over-apologizing is another habit that runs just as deep, and that is having extreme difficulty asking for help. Think about what happens when a child reaches out to a caregiver and is consistently met with dismissal, irritation, or silence. That child does not keep trying. Instead, they learn a painful but powerful lesson, that needing something from others leads to disappointment. So they stop asking altogether. They figure things out on their own. They push through pain quietly. They handle problems in isolation, not because they are naturally independent, but because experience taught them that reaching out is not safe. Fast forward to adulthood, and this survival strategy is still running in the background. These individuals will exhaust every possible option before considering asking someone for assistance. They might feel deeply ashamed just for needing help, or they worry they will be seen as a burden. Even in moments of genuine crisis, asking for support feels almost impossible. What looks like admirable self-sufficiency from the outside is often a wound that never fully healed. Moving into another deeply rooted habit, let's talk about people-pleasing and the compulsive need to put everyone else's needs before your own. On the surface, this might look like simply being a kind and generous person, but for many, it runs much deeper than that. When a child grows up in a neglectful environment, love and attention are rarely given freely. Instead, they learn that affection must be earned. Being agreeable, helpful, or accommodating becomes a survival strategy, a way to secure even the smallest amount of warmth or approval from caregivers who were otherwise emotionally unavailable. Over time, this survival mechanism becomes deeply wired into how a person operates. As an adult, they feel an almost compulsive need to make everyone around them happy, even at the cost of their own well-being, boundaries, and desires. Saying no feels dangerous. Disappointing someone feels catastrophic. Their own needs consistently get pushed to the very bottom of the list. What once kept them safe as a child is now quietly draining them as an adult. Closely connected to people-pleasing is another habit that many people never even notice in themselves, feeling deeply uncomfortable when someone offers them a genuine compliment or act of kindness. When a child grows up without consistent warmth, affirmation, or emotional support, positive attention becomes unfamiliar territory. The nervous system simply never learned how to receive it safely. So when an adult who experienced that kind of childhood hears something like, "You did an amazing job," or "I really care about you," something inside them resists it. It feels suspicious. It feels unearned. It might even feel overwhelming. Instead of simply saying thank you, they deflect. They say things like, "Oh, it was nothing," or "Anyone could have done that." They minimize the praise, redirect the attention, or immediately look for the hidden motive behind the kindness. Deep down, there is a belief running quietly in the background that says they are not truly deserving of good things. That belief was not chosen. It was absorbed during years of not receiving the consistent love and validation every child fundamentally needs and deserves. Now let's talk about another habit that often gets mistaken for a strength, and that is being hyper-independent to an unhealthy degree. On the surface, independence looks admirable. People who handle everything on their own are often praised for being strong, capable, and self-sufficient. But for those who experienced childhood neglect, this kind of independence does not come from a place of confidence. It comes from fear. When you grow up learning that the people who were supposed to be there for you consistently were not, you stop expecting support. You stop reaching out. You start handling everything yourself not because you want to, but because you believe deep down that depending on someone else will only end in disappointment. Over time, this becomes a rigid wall. Asking for help feels dangerous. Leaning on someone feels like a weakness or a setup for being let down again. So you do everything alone, carry every burden alone, and convince yourself that is just who you are. But it is not who you are. It is how you learn to survive. Closely connected to hyper-independence is another habit that often goes completely unnoticed, and that is constantly minimizing your own pain or emotions. You might catch yourself saying things like, "I am fine, it was not that bad," or others have it so much worse even when you are genuinely struggling inside. This habit runs deep for people who experienced childhood neglect. Many neglected children were taught, not always through direct words but through repeated experiences, that their feelings simply did not matter. Maybe when you cried, you were told to stop being dramatic. Maybe when you expressed fear or sadness, no one showed up to comfort you. Over time, you learned to silence yourself before anyone else could dismiss you. So you became your own dismisser. As an adult, this shows up as an almost automatic response to downplay your emotional experiences. You convince yourself you are overreacting. You push through pain without processing it. And you rarely allow yourself to fully acknowledge when something has genuinely hurt you. The emotions do not disappear, though. They simply get buried deeper and deeper over time. Another habit that often traces back to childhood neglect is an intense fear of abandonment. This might look like spiraling into anxiety when someone takes too long to reply to a message, or constantly worrying that the people you love are secretly pulling away from you. This happens because of something called anxious attachment, and it develops when caregiving during childhood was inconsistent. Maybe your parent was warm and present one day, then emotionally unavailable the next. As a child, you never knew which version of them you would get, so your nervous system stayed on high alert, always scanning for signs that love was about to disappear. That constant state of uncertainty follows you into adulthood. In relationships, it can show up as clinginess, overthinking every interaction, or feeling genuine panic when someone does not respond quickly. You might read into small things, assume the worst, or need constant reassurance just to feel safe. It is not neediness. It is a nervous system that learned love was never guaranteed. Another habit that often goes unnoticed is feeling guilty for having needs at all. Not just big needs, but everyday ones like needing rest after a long week, needing emotional support during a hard time, or simply needing a little space to recharge. For most people, these things feel completely natural. But for someone who grew up in a neglectful environment, acknowledging a need can trigger a deep wave of shame. This happens because neglected children repeatedly receive the message, sometimes spoken and sometimes unspoken, that their needs were too much, that asking for something was an inconvenience, that wanting care or comfort was selfish. Over time, they internalize that belief so completely that it became part of how they see themselves. So, as adults, even when they are exhausted, overwhelmed, or emotionally depleted, they push through without asking for anything. And if they do allow themselves to need something, the guilt that follows can feel almost unbearable. They find themselves apologizing for resting, for reaching out, for simply being human. That guilt is not weakness. It is a wound that was never allowed to heal. Building on that sense of guilt around having needs, there is another deeply connected habit worth exploring, and that is being extremely capable in practical matters while remaining completely emotionally unavailable, even to yourself. Many people who experienced neglect became remarkably self-sufficient from a very young age. They learned to cook, manage responsibilities, solve problems, and navigate life without much guidance. On the surface, this looks impressive, and in many ways, it genuinely is. But here is what often goes unnoticed. While they were mastering the logistics of life, they were simultaneously building emotional walls to protect themselves from the pain of not being seen or cared for. As adults, these individuals can handle almost anything practically, but the moment a relationship requires emotional depth, vulnerability, or genuine intimacy, they shut down completely. Opening up feels dangerous. Being truly known by another person feels terrifying. This is not a personality flaw. It is a protective response that made perfect sense during childhood, but now quietly prevents the deep human connection everyone deserves to experience. Another habit that often flies under the radar is the tendency to default to humor or sarcasm the moment a conversation starts getting serious or emotionally heavy. You might know someone like this, or perhaps you are this person, the one who cracks a joke right when things get real, who uses wit to sidestep anything that feels too vulnerable or raw. This is not just a personality quirk. For many people who grew up in environments where expressing emotions was met with dismissal, ridicule, or simply silence, humor became a survival tool. When showing sadness, fear, or pain was not safe, making people laugh was a way to stay connected without ever truly being seen. The problem is that this coping mechanism, while genuinely useful in childhood, creates a wall in adulthood. It keeps people at a comfortable distance. It prevents real intimacy from forming. And underneath all the jokes and clever remarks, there is often someone who deeply longs to be understood but has never felt safe enough to try. Another habit that quietly signals childhood neglect is that persistent feeling of being an outsider, even when you are surrounded by people who genuinely like you and want you there. You could be sitting in a room full of warmth and still feel like you're watching everything through a glass wall, close enough to see the connection but unable to fully step into it. This happens because belonging is not just about being invited into a space. It is an internal feeling, and that feeling gets built during childhood. When a child grows up in a home without a secure emotional base, without consistent warmth, safety, or attunement from caregivers, they never develop that deep inner sense that they truly belong anywhere. So even as adults, when people are being kind and inclusive, something inside does not quite believe it. The nervous system never learned what genuine belonging actually feels like, so it keeps signaling that something is off. This is not a personality flaw. It is an echo of an environment that never made you feel truly at home. Another habit deeply rooted in childhood neglect is being overly self-critical and holding yourself to impossibly high standards. When a child grows up receiving little to no validation from their caregivers, They begin to internalize a painful core belief that they are simply not good enough. Because no matter what they did, the praise, the warmth, the acknowledgement never came. So they concluded the problem must be them. Carrying that belief into adulthood, these individuals become their own harshest critics. They push themselves relentlessly, chasing perfection in their careers, relationships, and personal lives. But here is the heartbreaking part. No achievement ever feels like enough. They could get a promotion, finish a major goal, or receive genuine praise from others, and still that inner voice whispers that they could have done better, that they are still falling short. This relentless self-criticism is not ambition. It is a wound. It is a child still desperately trying to finally be good enough for someone who was never truly present to see them in the first place. Another habit deeply rooted in childhood neglect is having trouble identifying what you actually want or feel. This is sometimes referred to as emotional numbness or alexithymia, which is essentially the inability to recognize and name your own emotions. When children grow up in neglectful environments, nobody sits with them and helps them process their feelings. There are no conversations that sound like, "It seems like you are feeling sad right now," or "What is making you feel that way?" Without that emotional guidance, children never develop the internal vocabulary needed to understand their own inner world. So they grow into adults who feel genuinely disconnected from themselves. Simple questions like, "What do you want for dinner?" or "How are you feeling about this situation?" can cause real anxiety or a complete blank. It is not that they are being difficult. They literally do not know. This disconnection can make decision-making feel overwhelming and relationships feel confusing, because when you cannot access your own feelings, it becomes nearly impossible to communicate your needs to anyone else. Another habit deeply rooted in childhood neglect is staying in unhealthy relationships or situations far longer than you should. From the outside, people might wonder why someone remains in a clearly toxic dynamic, but the answer lies in what that person learned to accept as normal from a very young age. When caregiving is inconsistent, cold, or emotionally unavailable, that becomes the child's baseline understanding of what love looks like. Affection mixed with indifference, warmth followed by withdrawal. These patterns feel familiar, even comfortable, because they mirror what was experienced at home. As adults, neglected individuals often develop an unusually high tolerance for poor treatment. They do not immediately recognize red flags because dysfunction does not feel alarming to them. It feels like home. They may rationalize harmful behavior, make endless excuses for others, or convince themselves that things are not really that bad, a phrase we discussed earlier. By the time they acknowledge the relationship is genuinely harmful, the situation has often escalated significantly. Healing begins with recognizing that love should feel safe, not something you constantly have to survive. Another habit that often goes unnoticed is the inability to simply sit still. If you constantly need background noise, endless scrolling, non-stop work, or any form of distraction to get through the day, this might be more than just a personality quirk. For many people who experienced childhood neglect, silence is not peaceful, it is threatening. When everything goes quiet, there is nothing left to focus on except the thoughts and emotions that have never been properly processed. And that can feel absolutely overwhelming, so the mind finds a way to avoid it entirely. You stay busy. You fill every moment with something, anything, just to keep those feelings at a safe distance. The problem is that busyness becomes a wall between you and your own inner world. You might not even realize how much you are carrying because you have never allowed yourself the stillness to feel it. This constant need for distraction is not laziness or a short attention span. It is a deeply rooted survival response to emotional pain that was never given space to heal. Now, as we start to bring this all together, it is completely okay if some of what we covered today felt heavy or even a little painful to sit with. Recognizing yourself in these habits can stir up a lot of emotions, and that discomfort is actually a sign that something important is being acknowledged, perhaps for the very first time. But here is what I really want you to hold on to. Awareness is not just a small step. It is the most powerful step you can take toward healing. You cannot change what you cannot see, and now you are beginning to see clearly. And please hear this. Having these habits does not mean you are broken, damaged, or beyond repair. It means you were a child in a situation that asked too much of you, and you did what any human being would do. You adapted. You found ways to survive circumstances that were never your fault to begin with. These patterns were not weaknesses. They were shields you built when you had no other choice. From here, the most important thing you can do is treat yourself with compassion, not judgment. These habits were not character flaws. They were survival strategies built by a child who was doing the very best they could with what they had. You deserved better then, and you deserve better now. Therapy can be a powerful space to untangle these patterns and understand where they truly come from. Self-reflection, journaling, and mindfulness also help you reconnect with the inner world that neglect may have disconnected you from. And perhaps most importantly, surrounding yourself with safe, consistent people can slowly teach your nervous system that trust is possible. Healing is not linear, and it does not happen overnight. But it does happen. It is never too late to unlearn what no longer serves you and begin building a life grounded in genuine security and self-worth. You are not too far gone. You are not broken. You are someone who survived, and now you get to choose something different. If any of this resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below.